Hi, everyone. Wait a few seconds here before I start the stream. Thanks again for those that have been joining in and tuning in, regardless whether it's recording or if you actually are joining live. Looking to grow this thing a lot, so excited to continue to grow this out even more. I'm going to talk tonight about the 2025 draft again, do another stream on this and talk about, a few of the deficiencies I'm seeing in the draft. Obviously with the draft title I got, obviously with the video title, I should say, I got there. I really think the 2025 class from the start to finish has really dropped for me. And I actually think it's the weakest draft class I've seen since 2012. And I there's a lot of reasons for why. I'm going to get into why. This is going to be more of an interactive one. So for those that are joining in, feel free to interact. Feel free to leave your questions on the side. And we can talk about either this draft or if you want to talk about other prospects, feel free to go on there as well. But what I'm going to get into today is just about the 25 draft and where I see the weaknesses. And, there's some strengths as well. But I'm going to get into all of that and talk about that in a pretty roundabout way for the next half hour and change. So without further ado, I'm not going to put anything up right now. I'm just going to go ahead and just talk in general. First off, I think right now there's clearly not a person who's grabbed number one. I really thought early on that James Higgins was going to claim number one. I think he's got the elite skill set to claim number one, along with a guy like Michael Misa. Both of those guys to me are the two prospects that are still left within the draft class that will be number one potential style impact players in the National Hockey League. Those just, my general opinion on that. I think that, James has got to produce his scoring a little bit more. He's got to bring it a little bit more. Michael Misa has started to really climb for me. Right now he's my two, but, there's a strong likelihood if Higgins doesn't pick up the scoring, I think it's going to switch to where he will be two and Misa will be one. That being said, though, the last few years, you look at Bedard, you look at Celebrini, look back at even, Logan Cooley kind of came in a little bit later in 22, 21. It was mostly Owen Power for the most part. 2020, everybody had Alexis Lafreniere as the designated pick there. Looking back at those 5 years, though, there's been a lot of consensus number one overall picks, and there really isn't one in this draft this year. So that alone is pretty surprising. And then getting into more of the, the different players that are coming out right now, I think, different, in terms of different classes and different things. I mean, the strength of this class, and honestly, in my opinion, is in the overagers, the 05s and 06s in this class. I think there's a lot of really good leftover 05s and 06s that weren't picked in the last, the prior two drafts. And you can see some overagers get picked really early. One in particular, I think that's going to go pretty high is Aiden Park. He's already proven now at the USHL level that he is got the skill. He's got the ability. Did it really well at the prep school, at Shattuck St. Mary. Now playing for the Green Bay Gamblers in the USHL. And I think he's doing an excellent job in terms of, as an overager, you have to dominate the league you're in and being able to dominate the USHL like he has. And then going on to, eventually play for the University of Michigan next year. Says a lot about how his prospect development is and where he's gone from here. Going into more players that are overagers. A couple other guys I have on my radar that are going to go pretty high, in my opinion, are Benjamin Reutinen, who's a 2005-born player playing out of Finland. Played at the World Juniors this year. Thought he had a really good overall game and skill set to him. Really brought a lot of different scoring elements, not necessarily at the World Juniors, but in Liga this year. I think he's found his game. He's over a half a point per game in the Liga, which is not an easy league to score in as a professional. It should be really interesting to see where he goes and how he develops going forward, but he's another overager to watch. Highly ranked 41st on the international rankings for NHL Central Scouting. I think there's serious second or third round potential out of him. Some other guys that aren't necessarily mentioned a lot. A guy who I just added on my list recently is Oliver Tolk, playing for the Calgary Hitmen. Really rounded his game now in his 20-year-old year. Is clearly shown it. Even though he's a smaller player, he's produced immense amount of points, and he's the typical guy that gets overlooked and not really viewed by a lot of prospect people just because of him being 20 and small. but there's some real talent there, and I think the 05 class is still got a lot of players that I think are definitely worth, at the very least, a camp invite, if not a late round pick. Going into kind of the weaker parts of this draft, honestly, Finland does not have a really strong class this year. That's pretty universally thought by most scouts. A couple guys that I've had intrigue on is Matthias von Heinen, who plays IFHK. He's been playing in the league this year. I think he's probably your most impactful prospect coming out of Finland this year. Borderline first, if not second round pick. Ito Orpana was a guy who I had really high tracking on early, has really tapered off for me, hasn't really been as dominant. Max Westergaard is another guy who's a pretty interesting player. I think might find himself in fringe first-round conversations, probably more likely in the second. There's just not the depth that you normally see out of the Finns, and I was really high on the Finn class last year. I think this year this is one of their weaker classes. And then I think going into next year in 2026, I think they're going to find their way back into some real relevancy in the prospect world in terms of who's coming out of the draft in that particular year. The OHL is extremely strong this year. The Western Hockey League is very strong this year. The QMJHL is now finally getting some prospects in. Early part of the year, I thought Emil Guite was going to be the far and away best player, but he's really disappointed this year. I have him even in my third or fourth round at this point. Hasn't really shown the progression that you would expect out of a player that really dominated last year in the QMJHL. Clearly, far and away, I think the top guy right now is Caleb Desnoyers. I definitely a guy who I would consider in my top 10. He's right now at 11 for me. I think he currently sits at 11 for good reason. I think he's a really good player. I just think there's some limits in terms of his upside, but I've not had bad viewings of him by any means. I just don't have high impact viewings in terms of where he's scoring, 2 or 3 goals a game, or, he's got a 4 or 5 point game in the junior circuit. And usually guys who are in the top 10 have those games. So for me, as soon as he pops off and has those games, in my opinion, I think he'll find himself higher on the radar, but definitely a player to watch. I think in terms of the guy who can rise. The U.S. class is okay. I would say that really, honestly, the weakest part of this class, in my opinion, is in the goaltending. Looking at guys, the top goaltender that's perceived right now you get opinions. Some people think it's Luve Hermstam from Skellefteå. Some people think it's Pyotr Andreanov from Russia. I personally have Pyotr Andreanov as a fringe first-round guy. And then other people have Ravensbergen, the Western Hockey League kid who's 6'4" and a big kid. But, to me, I have him closer to the second or third round. But I personally, I just don't see a really elite goaltender in this class. I think for me to rank Andreanov as high as I do, I think he's the only guy who I've seen who really consistently plays as well as he should. Obviously, it's the NHL, so there's some leeway you got to have with their statistics and who he's playing and the quality of competition he faces sometimes. But he still faces a lot of really elite talent, a lot of really elite players that leads him into having to, find his game in a lot of different ways. He's going to find himself in some KHL time next year. To me, he's clearing away the guy to watch in terms of goaltenders. And then obviously there's a few sleeper prospects, but it's just not a strong class in that way. Like I just don't think there's a ton of really impressive players in terms of after you get towards, you get your Hagens, your Misa, your Matt Schaefers, your Eklunds. And I would even include Anton Frundell with the way he's been playing recently. And those are guys who I think could be very good NHLers. After that, you go and you have Porter Martone is the guy who everybody thinks will translate really well. But there's a lot of risk in his game as well. Do you look at somebody else like, Roger McQueen is another guy who's had a back injury, hasn't really had as many games as you would like to see out of him. He's already got some injury troubles as it is. He's very lanky, 6'5" and about 200 pounds. Does that contribute to something that is something you want to watch for? I don't know if the durability is there for him, and who knows if the strength will ever be either. It just depends on how his body adapts and the muscle mass there. Other guys who are considered after that point to me, I think there's some guys that are ranked at like 8 to 15 that personally would not be in a first round in a very strong class. I look at guys like, Radim Murtka is not a guy who should be in the first round of any class except for one that's this year. Big kid. He's 6'6". To me, he reminds me so much of Logan Stanley, a guy who just doesn't have movement, doesn't have the capabilities of the bigger guys that normally make the NHL, like the Jamie Alexiaks who can skate. Elmer Soderblom's a guy who's made the NHL now at 6'8". You look at Brian Boyle, was a guy who was a really strong player, but also had some good boots. Wasn't fast by any means, but he was able to hold his own. There's just a lot of lack of tangible talent past 7 or 8 in this draft for me. Going into, some other depth guys that are going into this, I think after it drops off, honestly, it goes 1 and 2 for me as a tier, 3 through 6 is a tier, 7 through 25 is a tier, and then there's like a major drop off after that. I just don't see a ton of really great talented players in this draft. I don't know that there's necessarily going to be anybody who you look at and think, hey, he's going to be a really talented player. He's got a lot of skill, good tenacity, things like that. So, with that, I'm not really that impressed with the overall quality of the class. We get into the Russians in this year's draft. Ivan Ryabkin is a guy who I think is, he's got some risk attached to him. There's some overlooked Russians that I think are coming into this year's draft class, and guys like Mikhail Melikov is a guy who I think should be highly, way higher ranked than he is right now. A lot of people have him towards the late rounds. I would have him as a 2nd to 3rd round pick. In my opinion, I think he's a guy who is the perfect kind of development person to really look at. You look at guys, I already talked about Pyotr Andreyanov. The Norwegians have a really strong class this year. We looked at last year with Stian Solberg and Brenzig Nygaard. This year they have Michael Eriksson is one of the younger players in this draft. I think a guy who, to me, definitely screams he should be, a top 60 pick, no question. Other Norwegians to look at, a couple guys in particular I really am fond of are Romeo Edvardsen Sorensen is a sleeper pick for me. A guy who I think, stands to be a stereotypical wings pick, playing in the under 18 level, just now finding himself in the under 20 level. I think there's some really intriguing attributes of him as a player. I think he is a candidate to be a late round sleeper. Another guy to look at who I don't think anybody really has this kid on their radar. I don't know if he's receiving the attention he deserves, but a kid who missed all of last year, he's now playing this year and has been really impressive at the under 20 level, is Denel Rodnitz, who plays for Christians. Let me look at it. Nybro IF, sorry. Playing over there and playing at the under 20 level and missing an entire year and coming in and playing as well as he is as an 06 is really impressive. I think he's a guy who you definitely look at and it's pretty unbelievable to miss a whole, your whole D1 year and then go into your draft year and do the things you're doing. Really impressive in that regard. Somebody who, somebody not a lot of people know about. I've caught maybe 1 or 2 viewings, so I'm not like an expert on this kid by any means, but I really like the skill set. I like the production, obviously, is clearly there. Should be something that is pretty enticing in that regard. Not traditional hockey-wise, there's not really a ton of high-end guys in this class. I would argue that next year's class is going to breed more of that. The highest guy I can think of, honestly, really honestly, there isn't anybody that sticks out to me in terms of like non-traditional hockey prospects that are going to be in the top 3. So I think it's weaker in that perspective. The high school class isn't super strong either. One guy who I think deserves a lot more attention that isn't getting as much as he should is Bryce Vitala, playing out of Minnesota in high school hockey there. Averaging 2 points a game, has never had under a point per game in his career at any level. 6'4" and 200 pounds, and it seems like nobody knows about this kid. He's just now gotten a D1 commit last year to Lindenwood, I believe. Not really on a ton of scouts' radars, which is surprising. I'm not sure if the quality of competition has something to do with it. I personally have caught only just clips and glimpses of this guy, but he's got an unbelievable shot, really good skill set, a whole bunch of different things that come into play with him. And then looking at just like there's just not really like people that have high-end skill in this class either. Like, There's I think James Higgins is one of the few guys that does have high end skill in this class. I look at him and I see a Kane-like skill set to him. He's very good at just sitting and monitoring plays, and can do really impressive looks in short amount of time. I think he's an incredible processor of the game. I think he finds these angles that a lot of people don't. I think his brain is always going, and him and Misa both have that quality, but I don't think anybody else in the class really has. Frendell has his moments. I don't really love how inconsistent he is, and I don't love the injury history with him. I look at him similar to Aaron Kiviharhu last year, a guy who really dealt with a lot of injuries, but also, had an unbelievable all-world ability to understand the game, and did so at a young age. So after that, Schaefer's got his warts. He's a great skater. I think he beats a lot of his problems with his skating. His stick work is impressive, but I do find times where I'm watching him and he will lose a guy. He will, he won't be always on somebody. He will find a way to veer off and be in a different direction. And the guy's in the corner, and he, without paying attention, he's behind him and scores. I look at Jackson Smith's a guy who I think is a really good puck transporter, really big physical frame, obviously very pro ready. Stick skills are excellent. I just like to see a little more offense out of Jackson for me to consider him a top pairing guy. I think he's a really strong 3 in my opinion. You look at guys like, Cole Reshney is a guy who I think has been criminally underrated by a lot of scouts. Cole to me is somebody who has come in and he's really had a huge projection, at least in the last month or two. Playing really well and being an important factor on the Victoria Royals in the Western Hockey League. I think there's just a ton of really good skill that he exhibits, and he's been producing all his life. There has never been a time where he hasn't produced. And it's surprising to me that he's, the value that's being placed on certain prospects in this draft is really surprising to me comparatively to some other guys. I think there's some misevaluation sometimes in some of the prospects that are being evaluated as these high-end guys. And it's surprising some of the rankings in terms of where some of these players are at. So, and I think that speaks to the lack of, consistency in terms of the evaluation of these players. But also I think there's not a real consensus, public or private. I just don't think there's a major consensus at all in this draft, which is why you're seeing so many varying opinions. I think it's why you're seeing so many different people talking about these different players in ways that are kind of surprising compared to what they have in the past. I don't think James Higgins is getting the scrutiny he would this year if it weren't for the past precedents set by guys like Adam Fantilli and Macklin Celebrini, and the likes of them. Because I think they've set a standard that isn't really achievable for most 17 and 18-year-olds. You're looking at Higgins right now; he's just over a point per game, but he's starting to slow down a little bit just because he's getting used to a college rigor and getting used to a college setup. Am I expecting him to be NHL ready next year? I wouldn't say that I would. I think there's not really an NHL ready guy in this class. Period. I just don't think anybody is, which is not good for those that are teams that, are looking for their next, generational talents. I don't think this year there is anybody who I would even consider to be an exceptional talent. I think there's really good players. I think there's very good talents. I just don't see the Celebrinis, the Bedards, the McKennas, the DuPonts, the Verhoffs, there's a lot of different players in these, classes before and classes after that clearly scream NHL ready by the time they hit 18. And there isn't a guy in this class like that. I think people thought Misa would be when he was closer to 16, 17. He's just not that now. We have a lot of different things to evaluate and look at going into the rest of the season. But, to me, I think there's, some opportunities for each of these guys to really kind of grow and find their game. There just isn't a high-end ability that is going to transform any sort of franchise or anything like that. So, again, like I said, I'm going to give an opportunity here. If anybody's watching, feel free to leave some questions off to the side. I'll answer anything about prospects and different things like that. I'm going to go ahead and kind of just, get into more about why, there's some other things I want to look at in this class in terms of, I think, some common misconceptions especially with different players. But overall, feel free to leave your questions in the chat. I'm going to probably talk now for another 5 or 10 minutes. Then I'm going to go into the rest of the questions that'll be off to the side here. Or if you're on recording, I'll listen to them after, and I'll leave my comments and stuff on the video as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share kind of the consolidated ranking from elite prospects, just so you guys can see. So you'll have me off to the side here, I think. Yeah. And so, looking at their consolidated ranking right now, obviously James Higgins is sitting at 1 right now and this is a conglomeration of, 12 or 14 different sources here, right? You got Bob McKenzie's 32, Ferrari's 32, McKean's, I don't think everybody is in on this list, but you probably got at least 10 rankings that are, making this conglomerate ranking here. But James Higgins is 1, obviously, for, he's been the 1 for the most part all year. I think this is the first time where I've seen an actual challenge for him at 1. I don't know that his play is going to bring him to a level that's going to keep him at 1. Considering, those like Michael Misa have come in and made major, you look at the production there. That's like Mitch Marner-like production coming out of junior for Michael Misa. And he's obviously a guy who had exceptional status, obviously a guy who has had the radar on him for a very long time. And I think, I looked at him this year. I looked at him like a Joe Valino in terms of ranking from the exceptional status candidates. I thought there might be a chance where this kid might only top out at 30, 40 points in his career at his peak. Now I'm seeing more of a 50 to 60 point upside with him. I think, he isn't going to be this elite talent by any means. I think he's a really good player. But I don't see elite talent out of Michael Misa. I see a very good, eventually second line guy, maybe even maybe a 2C at his height. But I think there's just more to give out of Michael Misa, but he's showing a lot in the junior circuit. And I think now the next level for him is probably to play in the NCAA, find a college that really wants him. It sounds like the rumors are either Boston College or Boston. See what he can do there and really kind of grow in his game as well. Obviously, Higgins, I think, deserves another year in Boston College. He needs to be able to rule it on his own accord. Give him another World Juniors to kind of prove that he's going to be the elite talent that we all think he might be. He's just not showing it right now. You look at guys like Matt Schaefer, I think, again, is a guy who I'm not as bullish on as the other people are in the public scouting community. I think he's a very good player. I think he's definitely a top 4 guy, no question. I just don't know that I see this explosive, high-end 1 or 2 style defenseman qualities out of him. I've had, you guys can look at my previous videos. I had a nice argument with Kate Cootie on here. He's probably on the stream, but just talking about, why my differences are, in comparison to what a lot of people in the community are having. Obviously his skating is excellent. Obviously he's a great stick. He's certainly not a dumb player by any means. I think he's a very talented player. To me, I think he's definitely the best in class. There's no question there in terms of defenseman. But there's some things in his game that I don't really love. And I've gotten into that. There's a few comments where I've left my thoughts in there. But, looking at, some other guys here, we'll go into Porter Martone. Porter Martone to me is a really great player, big player, good skater, great skill set. But there's some warts where he just doesn't bring it all the time. He doesn't really have the overall, skill set that you would like to see out of a big power forward style player. I don't think he's as demonstrative as you'd like him to be. I think he's too inconsistent in terms of how he produces. There's more things to be worked on. And obviously these kids are young. They're going to develop over time. But he's played pretty well. He was on pace with Misa, and I think Misa has really shown that he is the better player through his production lately and having the team he has in Saginaw. And then you look at, 5 and 6 here, we're going to get into, Anton Frendel and Victor Eklund. Anton Frendel, now that he is fully healthy, is showing exactly why a lot of people had him as, preseason 1 or 2. He, to me, has jumped back into the top 5 in this class. I think he is an absolutely phenomenal player. Definitely, I think the most pro ready out of the people that are in this grouping for this year's class. But I don't know that I love how undurable he is. I think, there's a difference in being strong and durable, and there's a difference in being strong and also experiencing injuries. And I think he's falling more towards that radar. I'm hoping that he can stay consistently healthy, because when he is healthy, I think he's an excellent player. Definitely somebody you want in your power play. I definitely see him as a guy who could be a second line left wing. Just need him to really, or sorry, not left wing, sorry, second line center. Just need to see more from him. And I think he's starting to prove it now. He had a 3 or 4 point game the other day in the Allsvenskan. I think, to me, he's clearly ready for the Swedish Hockey League, just like Victor Eklund is. And both of them are guys who, to me, they show their talent in spades, but there's also things I don't really love about what they bring to the table. Going into, some other guys that I want to talk about, Malcolm Spence right now, I can't believe he's consensusly ranked at 7 here. That seems very bullish compared to what I've seen out there. A lot of people aren't even starting to drop him closer to 15, 20. With Malcolm, you get a very mature player. You get somebody who's 200-foot player, a great skater, somebody who works hard in the corners, great offensively. But what's the upside ultimately, right? Is he as good as he can be? I think, a lot of people think he has limited upside. I don't know that. I don't know if that's always the case. I think, Spence, I think he's a very gifted player and has been very good at sharpening his existing skill sets. But you would like to see a little bit more dynamism in this game. I think there's a little bit more that he could bring in terms of his ability to stick handle. I think, I think he's competent. I just don't think he is elite. And those players tend to get drafted at 6 or 7. They're just good players that, are going to be well-rounded and, will be solid NHLers. But it's just, you may not get the dynamic element you want. I talked about Roger McQueen and Denoise already, and some other guys here. I'll talk about Logan Hensler real quick. To me, Logan Hensler is another guy. I don't know that I see this guy who should be in the first round. I think there's a really good skater. I think it's a great frame. I don't see the offense. I just don't know that he brings it that much, if ever. Can he transport pucks? Sure. Is he going to be a guy who you put on your power play? I wouldn't say that he is. I don't know that he really does anything that drastically amazing to where it would warrant him to be on the power play. And I think obviously he's young still. He's playing in college. And the point totals he has is not bad for a college defenseman by any means. I just don't know that he's going to be more than this. I think he's a half-point-a-game guy, on the college level, probably gets to the pro level, gets a little bit less scoring, might fit into a bottom pair somewhere, but I don't see the high-end skill that everybody else does. And then I say the same thing about Radim Murka, right? A guy really struggled at the pro level, now playing in juniors, just under a point per game right now, but that's juniors, honestly. I hate to say that, but high-end offensive players find a way. You look at Zane Parekh. Zane Parekh is a guy who was putting a massive production. He's still putting a massive production. That's a really high-end offensive defenseman. Radim Murka, to me, is a guy who isn't really producing that much offense. I think he's getting a lot of secondary assists. I think, he's only got 3 goals in 32 games at the junior level. I don't know that his shot's that impressive. There's just not a lot to him. And then we can go on. There's a ton of other guys on the list. We can talk about that in the questions, but it's just, I don't know. There's just a lot of very mid, as the kids say, there's a lot of very mid prospects in this class. I don't know that there's, I'm even getting, I'm looking at 12 right now, and I'm starting to see Hensler and Murka and different things like that. And I think in an average class, you're looking at guys like Hensler and Murka, they're probably closer to 25, 30. I don't know that they fit in to this high-end group. It's just not the same, ability and level that, I'm used to seeing out of these draft classes. It's just, there isn't these really impressive qualities that are coming out. There's not really anything that's really making me go, wow, jumping out of my seat kind of play out of a lot of these guys. And that it's a little discouraging. So, closer to 30 minutes now on the pod. So, Again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat below. Again, if you're watching a recording, please leave them in the, leave them in the video comments as well. To me, I think there isn't that level that I would want out of, the players that are in this class. It's not there for me. So any other questions or anybody wants to talk about any other players? I'm going to give a couple minutes. I got some future highlight videos that are going to be coming out here in the not too distant future. So I will be releasing those hopefully in the coming week or so. If you have any video ideas or comments, please leave them in the chat below. I would love to be able to kind of hear from you guys in terms of what you guys want to hear and listen to. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. I'd love to have you on and love to have you, either on Twitch or YouTube or Instagram or Twitter. I'm on all of them. Just type in Hidden Hockey and, you more than likely will find me. If you're on YouTube, obviously, please subscribe. I want to hopefully get to 1,000 subscribers by next year would be great. Obviously, it's a niche audience here in the draft world, so please share with other draft aficionados when you're watching. I would love to be able to talk more about different prospects and maybe get into some more, in-depth videos with, things I've seen in games and things like that. So that being said, I think I'm going to call it good here. Again, feel free to leave your comments in the side below. I just wanted to do a quick video on my thoughts on the 25 draft class and why I'm not necessarily as impressed as the average person is. So, again, please feel free to leave your comments on the side. Appreciate you guys listening in and tuning into these streams, whether it's during the lives or after the fact. And really appreciate you guys and have a great day.